You're watching Northern Crimes.
In 2016, Anchorage, Alaska was a city in the grip of fear. What began as isolated, brutal attacks along bike paths and parks soon turned into whispers of something far more sinister, the possibility of a serial killer in their midst. By year's end, 5 people had been murdered in cold blood. Each case left residents and authorities more confused as the trail seemed to grow colder with every step. It all culminated in a dramatic police shootout in November 2016 that finally brought the violence to an end. This is the true story of the Anchorage serial killings, when an unknown killer turned Anchorage into a hunting ground. This is Northern Crimes. James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4th, 1976 in Anchorage, Alaska. He was raised in the tough but tightly knit neighborhood of Wonder Park. Despite growing up in a neighborhood plagued by crime, Ritchie stood out in high school, both in stature and in talent. At East Anchorage High School, he played on the 1994 state championship football and basketball teams, where he built close bonds with future professional athletes like Trajan Langdon and Mayo Tosi. He was a promising student who scored a respectable 1,200 on his SATs, which led to a recruitment by West Virginia University to play football in 1994. At the time, it seemed like Ritchie was on the path to success with a promising future ahead of him. But that same year, tragedy struck. Quincy Thompson, a close friend, was shot and killed. For Ritchie, losing Quincy was a devastating blow that set him on a downward spiral. He dropped out of WVU after only 1 semester and returned to Anchorage in 1995. But the Anchorage Ritchie came back to was a city where opportunities seemed to have slipped away. The path that had once seemed so bright had turned dark. His old friends had gone on to have successful careers, but Ritchie's future was filled with uncertainty. His descent into crime began with drug dealing and dogfighting, earning him the street name Tiny, an ironic moniker given his imposing 6'3" frame. Ritchie's criminal record began to grow with arrests for drug-related offenses and other petty crimes. But in 2005, he crossed a new line when he was arrested during a home invasion. He was caught with plastic handcuffs and 2 handguns in his possession. This led to a 2-year jail sentence. After his release, Ritchie continued living in Anchorage, and it was during this period that he acquired a Colt Python .357 revolver, a weapon that would later become infamous in the string of murders to come. In 2013, Ritchie briefly moved to Broadway, Virginia, where his parents were living at the time. For a while, he appeared to be turning his life around, having no significant run-ins with the law other than some minor traffic violations. But in early 2016, after a breakup with his girlfriend, Ritchie returned to Alaska. Somewhere along the way, he reacquired that Colt Python from an acquaintance and settled into a trailer park. This time, his return to Alaska would signal the beginning of a terrifying chain of events. On July 3, 2016, the bodies of Brianna Foisey and Jason Netter Sr. were discovered along a bike path near Ship Creek. They'd been shot multiple times with a .357 caliber weapon. Brianna, just 20 years old, had struggled with homelessness and substance abuse. Jason Netter Sr., 41, had a troubled past with the law but was trying to rebuild his life. The police found little evidence at the scene, leaving them with few leads. 2 days later, the Anchorage Police Department ruled the deaths as homicides and released images of two persons of interest captured on surveillance footage. On July 29th, Richie struck again. Trayvon Kendall Thompson, known as Trey to his friends, was shot and killed while riding his bicycle home from work in East Anchorage. Earlier that evening, 3 young girls had noticed a tall figure lurking in the woods near Boland Street. They later described feeling an uneasy sense of dread, and moments later, they heard gunshots ring out. Then, when they looked out the window, they saw Trey's lifeless body on the ground and the stranger taking his bicycle. The investigation into Trey's murder soon revealed an unsettling pattern. Ballistics confirmed that the same .357 caliber weapon had been used in both Trey's murder and the double homicide on July 3rd. Yet, despite this growing evidence, the police still had no concrete leads on the killer. Witness descriptions and a composite sketch of the suspect started to point in a particular direction, but at this time, James Dale Ritchie, he still wasn't a suspect in the case. The next murders occurred on August 28th in Valley of the Moon Park. Kevin Turner, a man struggling with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, was walking through the park late that night. Another young man, Bryant Bree DeHuson, an environmental activist, was also in the area. The two victims weren't connected, and police surmised that DeHuson may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, possibly taking a late-night bike ride to meet up with a friend. Ritchie ambushed them in the darkness, shooting Turner under the pavilion and DeHuson somewhere on the bike trail. With the FBI now assisting the APD, a joint task force was formed and an advisory was issued warning residents to avoid isolated trails after dark. Public fear continued to rise. Anchorage's bike paths and parks, once popular recreational spots, now felt like the domain of a shadowy predator. In the early morning hours of November 12, 2016, everything changed. An Anchorage Police Department officer named Unsolved responded to a report of an unpaid cab fare in downtown Anchorage. As he approached the scene, he saw a tall man lumbering down the street.
Sir, Anchorage Police, can I get you to stop? Hello, 830. Does want to stop? I'll try to come off here at Hope Depot.
He pulled up alongside James Dale Ritchie, not realizing the danger he was facing. When Ritchie ignored Salau's initial request to stop, the officer called out again over his patrol car's megaphone. This time, Ritchie turned.
This is the Anchorage Police. You need to stop. This is the Anchorage Police. You need to stop.
He pulled out the Colt Python and opened fire. Ritchie fired 6 shots, hitting Salau multiple times and causing severe injuries to his bones and organs. Despite his injuries, Salau managed to exit his vehicle and return fire. Then Sergeant Mark Patsky, a canine officer, arrived at the scene and joined in the confrontation. A fierce shootout ensued, and it ended with Ritchie fatally wounded. When officers searched Ritchie's body, they discovered the Colt Python .357 revolver. Forensic testing later confirmed that it was indeed the same weapon used in the 5 murders that had terrorized Anchorage in 2016. The authorities took their time piecing together the full story, cautiously gathering all the evidence they needed before confirming Ritchie's role in the killings. In April 2017, the APD held a press conference, officially confirming that James Dale Ritchie was the sole perpetrator of the 5 murders. Ballistics evidence and investigative work conclusively tied him to each of the crimes. The cases were now closed, but the memories of that violent summer remained. The summer of 2016 left Anchorage with more questions than answers. What drove James Dale Ritchie to commit such heinous crimes? Why did he target the victims he chose? These questions still remain, even as Anchorage attempts to rebuild its sense of security. For the residents of this town, the summer of 2016 wasn't just a series of murders. It was a traumatic period that changed how they viewed their community and public spaces. James Dale Ritchie's criminal record, his descent from a promising high school athlete to a hardened criminal, and his return to Alaska in 2016 all pointed to a man who'd somehow lost his way long ago. But even knowing how he got there doesn't fully explain why he did what he did. For the victims' families and the community at large, the pain of that summer lingers on. The Pacific Northwest highways are often shrouded in fog. Mist rolls in from the ocean, casting an eerie silence over these long and winding roads. And on a cold January night in 1981, the quiet town of Kaiser, Oregon, was plunged into darkness by a shocking and brutal crime. Inside a dimly lit office building, 2 young women working the night shift as cleaners were unaware their lives were about to change irrevocably. Little did they know, a man had slipped into the building with deadly intent. Within moments, he attacked. One woman wouldn't survive, but the other would live to tell a tale that would bring fear to everyone along the West Coast's busiest and most notorious highway. This is the true story of the I-5 murders, and this is Northern Crimes. Lisa Garcia, the survivor, later recounted the harrowing events of that night to the police. She and her coworker, Sherry Hall, had been casually chatting while cleaning the offices. Suddenly, an armed man appeared, his intentions far more sinister than mere robbery. After assaulting both women, he then shot them. Sherry Hall died instantly, but Lisa Garcia, defying the odds, survived. Her survival would later provide investigators with a crucial piece of the puzzle, leading them to a dark truth that had been haunting the I-5 corridor for months. The attack on Sherry Hall and Lisa Garcia, it wasn't an isolated incident. For months, a string of similar crimes had been reported along Interstate 5, stretching from Northern California all the way to Washington State. Women were being assaulted, robbed, and attacked at gas stations, convenience stores, and office buildings, all located within a short distance of the highway. Each crime shared common elements: a male suspect with an athletic build, often wearing a disguise. Sometimes he donned a fake beard, other times a bandage over his nose. He was methodical, efficient, and always seemed to vanish into the night before law enforcement could arrive. The media would dub the perpetrator the I-5 killer and spread fear through the communities along the highway. The randomness of the attacks made everyone a potential target. Women grew afraid to work late shifts, and business owners installed extra security measures hoping to deter the killer. Despite tireless efforts from police across multiple jurisdictions to connect the dots, the I-5 killer remained elusive. As investigators delved deeper into the series of crimes, a name repeatedly surfaced: Randall Woodfield. Though previously questioned, Woodfield's involvement in earlier crimes remained unproven. Who was this man, and why had he caught the authorities' attention? To unravel this mystery, we need to journey back to the beginning, to the small coastal town of Otter Rock, Oregon, where Woodfield's story began. Randall Woodfield was born on December 26, 1950, into an upper-middle-class family. He grew up in a picturesque setting along the Oregon coast, with 2 older sisters and a father who was a successful executive at Pacific Northwest Bell. From an early age, Woodfield showed athletic promise. He excelled in sports, particularly football, and quickly became a local star at Newport High School. To those around him, Woodfield seemed like he had everything going for him. However, just beneath the surface, early signs hinted that all was not well. As a teenager, Woodfield's behavior started raising red flags. He was caught exposing himself to young girls, incidents that were quietly swept under the rug to protect his promising football career. His high school coaches, keen on their star player's success, concealed these episodes. When Woodfield turned 18, his juvenile record was expunged, allowing him to leave these troubling events behind. He continued his football journey, securing spots at Treasure Valley Community College and later Portland State University. At Portland State, Woodfield thrived on the football field as a wide receiver for the Vikings. He also immersed himself in religious groups, joining the Campus Crusade for Christ and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. To teammates and friends, Woodfield seemed a clean-cut, devoted young man. However, his off-field behavior painted a much different picture. Multiple arrests for indecent exposure revealed a pattern of deviant behavior that appeared to worsen over time. Despite his troubling behavior, Woodfield's athletic talent caught the attention of NFL scouts. In 1974, the Green Bay Packers drafted him in the 17th round. This opportunity seemed like a turning point, a chance for fame and success. However, Woodfield's time with the Packers was brief. Cut during preseason, his professional football career ended before it truly began. Disappointed and adrift, he returned to Oregon, where his life began to unravel. By the mid-1970s, Woodfield had abandoned his football dreams and turned to increasingly violent criminal behavior. In 1975, he was arrested for a series of assaults on women in Portland, threatening them with a knife. Caught in a police sting operation, Woodfield was convicted of second-degree robbery and sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he served only 4 years before being released on parole in 1979. Following his release, Woodfield's behavior became more erratic and dangerous. The murder of Sherry Ayers in October 1980 marked the beginning of his violent spree. Ayers, a former classmate whom Woodfield had known since childhood, was found in her Portland apartment. She'd been brutally attacked and left to die. Ayers was a University of Oregon graduate and an X-ray technician, well liked by those who knew her. Woodfield was questioned about her death, but without enough evidence to link him directly to the crime, he was released. However, this would only be the start of a series of brutal crimes that would follow. As November 1980 drew to a close, Woodfield's murderous rampage intensified. His next victims were Darcy Fix, a 22-year-old woman, and her boyfriend, 24-year-old Douglas Altig. On a quiet evening in North Portland, Woodfield invaded Fix's home, catching the unsuspecting couple off guard. With cold precision, he bound both Fix and Altig before shooting them. The brutality of this double homicide sent shockwaves through the community. In a chilling twist, investigators later uncovered that Woodfield and Fix were connected through mutual acquaintances at Portland State University. This revelation added a disturbing layer to the crime, suggesting a calculated choice of victim rather than a random act of violence. However, despite this connection, law enforcement again found themselves at an impasse. The lack of concrete evidence linking Woodfield to the murders allowed him to slip through the cracks. This left him free to continue his reign of terror along the I-5 corridor. As 1980 faded into 1981, Woodfield's violence escalated. His crimes extended beyond murder to include a string of armed robberies along Interstate 5. On December 9, 1980, he robbed a gas station in Vancouver, Washington, wearing a fake beard. 4 days later, he held up an ice cream parlor in Eugene, Oregon. And on December 14, he robbed a drive-in restaurant in Albany, Oregon. He had a distinct modus operandi during these crimes, often using a disguise and brandishing a gun to intimidate his victims. In January 1981, Woodfield's rampage continued. He robbed the same Vancouver gas station for a second time and committed another robbery in Eugene. On January 12, he escalated his violence further by shooting and wounding a female clerk at a grocery store in Sutherland, Oregon. Then, on January 14, he invaded the home of two young sisters in Portland. His cruelty would leave a lasting scar on their lives. On January 18, 1981, Woodfield's actions took a deadly turn in Kaiser, Oregon. Entering an office building late at night, he encountered Sherry Hall and Lisa Garcia, two young women working the night shift as cleaners. Woodfield assaulted both women, then shot them, leaving them for dead. Sherry Hall succumbed to her injuries, but Lisa Garcia miraculously survived. Her survival would be pivotal in eventually bringing an end to the madness. But Woodfield wasn't done. Not long after the attack in Kaiser, Woodfield's path of destruction led him to Mountain Gate, California. On February 3, 1981, he entered the home of Donna Eckerd and her 14-year-old daughter, Janelle Jarvis. Both were later found in bed, each having been shot. This double murder shocked the quiet community. It underscored the escalating brutality of the I-5 killer. By February 1981, Woodfield's violent spree had captured the full attention of law enforcement across multiple states. Detectives from various jurisdictions collaborated, piecing together the puzzle that pointed to Woodfield. His erratic behavior, the connection to past victims, and the mounting eyewitness descriptions were tightening the noose. On March 5, 1981, Woodfield was brought into the Salem Police Department for interrogation. Evidence found in his Springfield apartment, including a spent .32 caliber bullet and a roll of tape similar to what had been used in the crimes, provided crucial links. Further, Lisa Garcia's identification of Woodfield in a photo lineup, along with other witness testimony, helped solidify the case. By March 16, Woodfield was indicted on multiple charges including murder, assault, and robbery. In the summer of 1981, Randall Woodfield stood trial in Salem for the murder of Sherry Hall and the attempted murder of Lisa Garcia. The trial captivated the nation, shedding light on the dark and violent path Woodfield had carved along the I-5. After just 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Randy Woodfield was sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years, ensuring he would never walk free again. Randall Woodfield's reign of terror along the I-5 corridor left a trail of devastation and sorrow. While only convicted of one murder, the evidence, including DNA testing in 2012, suggested his crimes spanned much further, involving numerous assaults, robberies, and potential homicides. Woodfield's story is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most unsuspecting facades. To this day, he remains in the Oregon State Penitentiary, serving out his life sentence. Though justice was served, the questions of why and how such violence could manifest in one individual remain unanswered. The legacy of the I-5 murders still linger in the mists of the Pacific Northwest, a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of evil. Tacoma, Washington, May 24th, 1935. A typical spring afternoon turned to panic as 9-year-old George Weyerhaeuser vanished on his way home from school. George, heir to one of America's wealthiest lumber dynasties, disappeared without a trace. That evening, the Weyerhaeuser family received a ransom note demanding $200,000 in unmarked bills. The message was clear: deliver the money within 5 days or face unimaginable consequences. The family was thrust into a high-stakes game of survival where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. But who were the culprits behind this brazen crime, and how far would they go to get what they wanted? The Weyerhaeuser family's wealth made them a prime target in the turbulent era of the Great Depression. George, an ordinary boy by all appearances, had no way of knowing that the short walk from school to home would thrust him into national headlines. His kidnappers were a pair of desperate men, Harmon Whaley and William Daynard, both hardened by lives of crime and time spent in the Idaho State Penitentiary. They, along with Whaley's wife Margaret, devised a meticulous plan to abduct the young heir and extort his family. The ransom note delivered to the Weyerhaeuser home was as chilling as it was direct. Instructions for delivering the money, coded messages to be exchanged in the personal ads of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and a warning not to involve the police. Over the next 5 days, the family followed the cryptic orders, each step more unnerving than the last. The ransom exchange was orchestrated with a precision that bordered on theatrical. On May 29th, George's father was directed to drive along Highway 99 to a desolate spot, leave the ransom money in the car, and walk away without looking back. Moments later, George was freed unharmed, a miraculous end to the family's nightmare, but the kidnappers' escape wouldn't last. The FBI and local law enforcement quickly mobilized, tracing the ransom money using serial numbers meticulously recorded before the exchange. As the marked bill surfaced across the country, the net tightened. Investigators tracked Whaley and Daynard through their careless spending, uncovering their trail piece by piece. The pivotal break came when Margaret Whaley, under pressure, confessed to her involvement and provided critical details about her accomplices. The FBI's methodical work led to the capture of Harmon Whaley and William Daynard, both of whom were found in possession of evidence tying them to the kidnapping. The three conspirators faced swift justice. Harmon Whaley and William Daynard were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, while Margaret Whaley received a lesser sentence for her cooperation. Together, they were held accountable for a crime that had gripped the nation. As for George, the ordeal left a mark, but he grew to lead a life of resilience, eventually becoming the chairman of the Weyerhaeuser Company Board. The Weyerhaeuser kidnapping underscores how desperation and greed can lead to the unthinkable. It also raises a haunting question. In a world driven by power and wealth, how do we protect the most vulnerable among us? Renton, Washington, 1969. A quiet city shaken by a string of shocking crimes. Over 2 years, 4 young lives were lost in a series of attacks that left the community in gripping fear. At the center of it all was a young man whose actions defied comprehension, leading investigators on a harrowing journey to uncover the truth. This is the story of Gary Gene Grant, one of the Pacific Northwest's most chilling cases. Gary Gene Grant grew up in Renton, Washington in the 1950s and 60s. His upbringing was challenging, marked by economic hardship and family struggles. By his teenage years, he dropped out of school, isolated and grappling with emotional and mental health challenges. After a short and troubled stint in the military, Grant returned home, where his behavior took a disturbing turn. In December 1969, 19-year-old Carol Adele Erickson disappeared while walking home. Her death would be the first in a series of incidents that left residents reeling. Then, in September 1970, 17-year-old Joanne Mary Zuloff was tragically killed in an accident that bore striking similarities. Investigators noted troubling patterns, but struggled to piece together the puzzle. Then, in April 1971, the case took an even darker turn when 2 young boys, Scott Andrews and Bradley Lyons, went missing. Their disappearance heightened fears, and when their bodies were discovered, the need to find answers became urgent. The case broke wide open when a blood-stained hunting knife was found near the scene of the boys' disappearance. Investigators traced the knife through several owners, eventually leading them to Gary Gene Grant. Under questioning, Grant initially claimed memory lapses, but later provided information about the crimes. His arrest brought relief to a community that was desperate for justice. The evidence against him, including shoe prints, a weapon, and his own admissions, was overwhelming. Investigators worked carefully to ensure a solid case while navigating legal challenges over how some evidence had been obtained. Grant's trial began in August 1971. Prosecutors presented detailed evidence, including physical items and testimony linking him to the crimes. Although his defense team argued that he wasn't mentally fit, a forensic evaluation determined that Grant was capable of standing trial. On August 25, 1971, Gary Gene Grant was convicted of multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The outcome provided closure to families in a grieving community, but left lingering questions about the events that led up to the crimes. The Renton murders underscore the stark duality of human nature, the capacity for unimaginable violence, alongside the resilience of a community united in a pursuit of justice. Decades later, Gary Grant's crimes remain a haunting chapter in Renton's history, reminding us of the delicate balance between good and evil and the need for vigilance in the face of darkness. Seattle, July 7th, 1993. An electric night in a city pulsating with the grunge music revolution. Amidst the vibrant energy of the punk scene, tragedy struck. Mia Zapata, lead singer of the Gits, a rising force in Seattle's punk movement, was brutally murdered. The discovery of her body on a quiet Central District street sent shockwaves through the community. Who could commit such a heinous act against someone beloved by so many? This is the story of Mia Zapata's murder, a crime that haunted Seattle for decades before justice was served. Mia Zapata was no ordinary artist. Known for her passionate voice and magnetic stage presence, she was the heart and soul of the Gits. Their energetic performances and raw lyrics captured the spirit of Seattle's punk scene. Fresh off a successful West Coast tour, the band seemed poised for stardom, but that dream came to an abrupt and very violent end. After a night out with friends, Zapata decided to walk home. And somewhere along the way, she was attacked. The details were horrifying. She was beaten, raped, and strangled to death with the drawstrings of her hoodie. Her body was left on the street, a stark and tragic contrast to the vibrant life she'd led. The murder devastated her friends and fans, sparking an outpouring of grief and anger. Yet, despite efforts to find her killer, including benefits and fundraisers led by Joan Jett and Kurt Cobain to hire private investigators, the case went cold. For nearly a decade, Mia Zapata's murder was a painful mystery. Then, in 2003, a breakthrough came in the form of DNA technology. Saliva that had been collected from her body was analyzed and matched to Jesus Mezquia, a Cuban immigrant living in Florida who had no known connection to Zapata or Seattle's music scene. Investigators pieced together a chilling portrait of Mezquia, a man with a serious history of violence against women. The randomness of the crime was as shocking as its brutality. Zapata had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Mezquia had taken advantage of that moment to commit an unthinkable act. Mezquia was arrested and extradited to Seattle. In 2004, he stood trial for Mia Zapata's murder. The evidence was overwhelming, with DNA tying him directly to the crime. The trial revealed the senseless cruelty of the act, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Mezquia was convicted and sentenced to 36 years in prison. For the friends and family of Mia Zapata, the conviction brought some closure, but the void left by her death could never be filled. Mia Zapata's murder remains a haunting reminder of how quickly violence can shatter even the most vibrant lives. Her death galvanized a movement, inspiring the creation of Home Alive, an organization dedicated to teaching self-defense and combating violence. But questions still linger. How many other crimes remain unsolved, and how can we ensure safety in a world where darkness often strikes at random? Mia's legacy endures, both as an artist whose voice will never fade, and as a symbol of resilience against violence. Camano Island, Washington, 2008. A peaceful, wooded retreat in the Pacific Northwest became the unlikely setting for a daring and chaotic crime spree. Colton Harris Moore, a 17-year-old with a troubled past, was on the run. Known as the, quote, barefoot bandit, he left a trail of stolen planes, cars, and boats across multiple states, often leaving behind his signature, bare footprints. How the heck did a teenager outwit law enforcement for over 2 years and capture the world's attention? This is the story of a fugitive whose exploits blurred the line between folk hero and criminal. Born in 1991, Colton Harris Moore's childhood was marked by poverty, neglect, and a volatile home life. Growing up on Camano Island, he spent his youth exploring the woods, dreaming of escape, and learning to survive on his own. By the age of 12, he had his first felony conviction. By 15, he was a runaway. Harris Moore's crimes started small, burglarizing vacation homes for food and supplies, but they escalated into something far more audacious. He taught himself to hotwire cars and later, remarkably, to fly planes by reading manuals and watching online tutorials. Over 2 years, he stole 3 aircraft, several boats, and numerous cars, leaving law enforcement scrambling to keep up. His nickname, the Barefoot Bandit, came from the footprints he left at some of his crime scenes. Harris Moore became a fugitive, evading local police, the FBI, and even Homeland Security. As his escapades grew bolder, his legend spread, and he garnered a following online, with some hailing him as a modern-day outlaw. Tracking Colton Harris Moore proved challenging. He was a skilled survivalist, disappearing into the dense Pacific Northwest wilderness when authorities closed in. His crimes spanned several states and even crossed into Canada, where he allegedly stole a plane and crash-landed it in a field. In July 2010, Harris Moore upped the stakes by flying a stolen plane to the Bahamas. His daring escape ended after a week-long manhunt on the islands. Bahamian authorities captured him after he crash-landed the plane and attempted to flee by boat. Extradited to the U.S., Harris Moore faced a litany of charges, including theft, burglary, and unauthorized flight. In December 2011, he was sentenced to over 7 years in state prison, with an additional 6.5 years for federal crimes to be served concurrently. During his sentencing, Harris Moore expressed remorse for his actions and acknowledged the pain that he'd caused his victims. The judge described his case as both a tragedy and a testament to human resilience, noting his intelligence and resourcefulness despite a troubling upbringing. Colton Harris Moore's story is both extraordinary and unsettling. How did a teenager fueled by desperation and ingenuity outwit law enforcement for so long? And what does his journey say about the allure of rebellion and the vulnerabilities of the systems that are meant to stop it? Washington State's history is marked by tales of ingenuity, resilience, and community, but beneath the beauty of its landscapes lie stories of darkness and mystery. From the chilling manipulations of a cyberstalker to the desperate crimes of a runaway turned folk hero, these cases reveal the fragile boundaries between safety and chaos. Every story serves as a stark reminder that technology can be weaponized, greed can turn violent, and even the brightest lives can be extinguished in an instant. As these stories echo through the years, we're left to wonder, what other secrets linger in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest? Oregon is one of the most beautiful states in the country. There's striking mountains, crystal clear rivers, and wilderness that spans hundreds of miles. The cities are vibrant, the towns quaint, and the people are diverse, often friendly, and willing to help their neighbors. But like any other state in the U.S., dark undercurrents exist. In fact, Oregon has been home to some of the most disturbing crimes of the last century. Today, we'll look at 5 of the stories that have cast a shadow on this great state, leaving families, law enforcement, and the general public with unsettling questions. Welcome to Northern Crimes. Gresham, Oregon, January 17th, 1994. A customer entered the Leathers Oil Company gas station early that morning, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. Instead, they stumbled onto a crime scene that would leave the community in shock. 3 employees, Virginia K. Endicott, Rosalie Faye Gertz, and Mary Beth Carey, lay motionless in the storage garage, each one shot execution style. Law enforcement arrived quickly, but the killer had already vanished, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. Who would commit such a brutal crime, and why? Leathers Oil Company was a staple in Gresham, providing fuel and convenience to locals. The 3 women working that morning were well known in the community. Rosalie Faye Gertz, 51, was a dedicated worker and a beloved mother-in-law to Mary Beth Carey, who was only 25 years old. Virginia K. Endicott was also a familiar face, part of the station's close-knit staff. Among those who once worked there was Tyrone Thies, a young employee who'd been fired months earlier. Described as quiet but reliable, Thies had one mark on his record, an incident where he stole $30 from the register. He later returned the money and apologized, but the damage was done. Shortly after, he left the job and disappeared from the public eye. The initial investigation pointed to robbery. The station's safe and cash register had been emptied, with $9,000 missing. However, it wasn't just the money that shocked investigators. It was the cold, methodical way the murders had been carried out. The three women had been forced into the back storage garage, ordered to lay face down, and shot in the back of the head. Detectives followed every lead, but for weeks the case remained unsolved. Then, on February 10th, 1994, a break came when law enforcement received a tip that pointed to a familiar name, Tyrone Thies. When officers searched his Southeast Portland apartment, they uncovered evidence linking him to the crime. An arrest warrant was issued on February 16th, but by then, Thies had vanished. As the investigation expanded, authorities turned their attention to Thies' known associates. Two individuals emerged as key players: his cousin, Lawrence Scherf, and a friend, Lori Stevens. Under police questioning, they admitted they'd driven Thies to the gas station that morning. They claimed they had no idea he intended to rob it, and they were horrified when he returned to the car carrying a bag of stolen cash. Both Scherf and Stevens were arrested and charged with felony murder for their roles as accomplices. They were sentenced to 10 years in prison, but their cooperation came with an agreement. They would testify against Thies if he was ever captured. Despite being placed on the FBI's most wanted list, Thies managed to evade capture. Law enforcement suspected he fled to Idaho and adopted a new identity, possibly using the alias Tyrone Walter Crozier. His distinguished tattoo of a Black Panther remained one of the only concrete identifiers available to the public. The Leathers Oil Company murders received widespread media attention, including features on Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted. Yet, despite multiple reported sightings and years of pursuit, Thies remains at large. For the families of Virginia K. Endicott, Rosalie Faye Gertz, and Mary Beth Carey, the pain of their loss remains, compounded by the absence of justice. Decades have passed, but the case is still open, and law enforcement believes Thies may still be alive under an assumed identity. Will his trail ever be rediscovered, or has he disappeared forever into the cracks of society? Salem, Oregon, 1984. The disappearance of two young women within months of each other sent shockwaves through this otherwise peaceful community. Both cases ended tragically, their bodies found miles apart, each bearing signs of horrifying violence. These crimes, linked by their brutality, led investigators to William Scott Smith, a man whose actions would forever scar Salem's history. But what drove him to commit such heinous acts? William Scott Smith was born on April 29, 1959. Raised in Oregon, his early life gave little indication of the violence he would later unleash. Dropping out of high school, Smith took on various odd jobs, including working as a fry cook. His brushes with the law began in 1978, when he was convicted of second-degree burglary in Salem. Though sentenced to a 1-year suspended term, his criminal behavior escalated in the years to come. Smith's trouble with the law wasn't limited to theft. In 1979, he faced charges for second-degree assault, but was acquitted. He later moved to Boise, Idaho, where his criminal tendencies took on a more sinister nature. In 1981, he was convicted of indecent exposure, and in 1982, his name surfaced during the investigation of a local girl's unsolved murder. Under mounting scrutiny, Smith returned to Oregon, where he felt less visible to law enforcement. The first victim, Rebecca Darling, was a 21-year-old convenience store clerk working the graveyard shift on February 19, 1984. She was last seen alive by a customer around 3:20 a.m. By 3:50 a.m., the store was deserted and Rebecca was missing. More than a month later, her body was discovered along the Little Pudding River, strangled with a rope and her hands bound behind her back. Less than 2 months later, Catherine Redmond, 18, vanished after attending a fraternity party at Willamette University. Her car was discovered abandoned with the engine running, but she was nowhere to be found. 4 days later, her body was located just miles from where Darling had been found. Catherine had been sexually assaulted and died from traumatic asphyxiation. Witnesses near the scene recalled seeing an older model Pontiac station wagon, which became a crucial clue. By April 18, 1984, investigators had identified William Smith as a person of interest. He drove a car matching the description given by witnesses, and he'd suspiciously called for a tow truck near the site of Redmond's murder. Before authorities could bring him in, Smith was arrested for making obscene phone calls, a charge that would ultimately lead to his downfall. On April 26th, Smith was arraigned on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including physical evidence and witness testimonies linking him to both crime scenes. He waived his right to a jury trial, and the judge found him guilty on all counts. Smith was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 40 years. While Rebecca Darling and Catherine Redmond's cases were solved, another mystery lingered. The 1982 disappearance of Sherry Irely, an 18-year-old pizza delivery girl. For decades, her family searched for answers until cold case detectives revisited Smith in prison. In 2007, Smith confessed to abducting and strangling Irely during a botched ransom attempt. Although her body was never recovered, his confession provided some closure, and he received a 3rd life sentence. Smith's involvement in additional murders, including that of Terry Monroe in 1981, further cemented his legacy as one of Oregon's most dangerous criminals. Decades after his capture, the pain endured by his victims' families remains a testament to the devastation caused by his actions. William Scott Smith's crimes revealed a calculated pattern of violence that shook Salem, Oregon to its core. What drives a person to commit such acts? And are there other cases that will forever remain buried? Newport, Oregon, December 2001. The quiet coastal town, known for its picturesque scenery and thriving fishing community, became the backdrop for a gruesome discovery. 2 young children were found weighted down in the icy waters of the Alsea River. Just days later, the nightmare deepened when divers pulled 2 suitcases from the marina containing more victims. The investigation would eventually lead to Christian Longo, a man whose actions shocked the nation and destroyed his family. Christian Longo was born on January 23, 1974, in Nispalanti Township, Michigan. Known for his charisma and charm, he married Mary Jane Baker at the age of 19. Together, they had 3 children, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison. Outwardly, the Longo family seemed like the perfect picture of domestic happiness, but behind the scenes, their lives were unraveling. Christian's ambition often outpaced his financial means. After a series of failed business ventures, he turned to fraud to maintain the facade of a comfortable life. He forged checks, stole credit cards, and racked up thousands of dollars in debt, all while keeping his mounting troubles hidden from his wife and friends. By 2001, the family had been evicted from their home in Michigan, and Christian moved them across the country to Oregon, hoping for a new start. On December 19th, 2001, a fisherman on the Alsea River found the body of 4-year-old Zachary Longo floating in the water. A pillowcase filled with rocks had been tied to his leg to weigh him down. 3 days later, the body of 3-year-old Sadie was discovered under similar circumstances. The small community was horrified, but the scope of the tragedy became even clearer on December 26th, when divers searching the Embarcadero Marina recovered 2 suitcases from the water. Inside were the bodies of 34-year-old Mary Jane Longo and her 2-year-old daughter, Madison. Investigators quickly realized that the entire Longo family had been murdered, with Christian Longo conspicuously absent. Witnesses reported seeing him in the days following the murders, but he'd since disappeared. Evidence at the crime scenes and the family's financial struggles pointed to Longo as the prime suspect. Police discovered that he'd drained their bank accounts and used a stolen credit card to flee the area. On December 27th, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest, and his name was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Eventually, authorities tracked Christian Longo to Cancun, Mexico, where he was living under the stolen identity of Michael Finkel, a former New York Times journalist. He spent his days lounging at resorts and befriending tourists, far removed from the horrors he'd left behind. On January 13th, 2002, Mexican authorities arrested him in the town of Tulum, about 80 miles south of Cancun, and extradited him to the U.S. During his trial, Longo initially claimed that Mary Jane had killed their 2 oldest children in a fit of rage, and that he, in shock, had killed her and their youngest daughter. This narrative quickly fell apart, though. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation, including how Longo had carefully staged the murders and disposed of the bodies. In April 2003, Christian Longo was convicted on 4 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to death. However, due to the moratorium on executions in Oregon, he remains on death row at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Longo's case raises haunting questions about the true depths of human desperation. How can someone reach such a breaking point, and what warning signs are missed before such tragedy unfolds? Portland, Oregon, July 7th, 1975. A quiet night in the city's Old Town district was interrupted by chaos as flames erupted from the modest Pomona Hotel. The fire quickly consumed the building, trapping residents inside. By the time firefighters extinguished the blaze, 12 lives were lost. But as investigators examined the aftermath, they uncovered a chilling truth. This was no accident. It was arson. The Pomona Hotel was a far cry from its historic predecessor, Erickson's Saloon, which once boasted the, quote, longest bar in the world. By the 1970s, the building had been repurposed as a low-cost residence for Portland's most vulnerable citizens. For 80 cents a night, guests found a clean bed and a measure of stability in an area marked by economic struggle. The residents of the Pomona were diverse: laborers, retirees, and those living paycheck to paycheck. It was a place where people knew their neighbors, often sharing stories and resources. But behind its unassuming facade, the building lacked essential fire safety measures, creating a disaster waiting to happen. Around 10:35 p.m., a man later identified as Roy Jennings Beard walked into a Chevron gas station near the Pomona Hotel and purchased 50 cents worth of gasoline. Within 30 minutes, the quiet evening erupted into chaos. Flames engulfed the Pomona, spreading rapidly from the stairwell, a strategic location that cut off escape routes for those on the upper floors. Residents scrambled for safety, many climbing out windows and onto fire escapes. Witnesses described scenes of desperation, with people shouting for help as smoke poured from the building. Firefighters arrived to find an inferno, with blistering temperatures reaching 1,000 degrees on the third floor. Despite their efforts, the fire claimed 8 lives that night, with 4 more victims succumbing to injuries in the following weeks. Investigators quickly determined the fire was intentionally set. A discarded gasoline canister near the building pointed to arson. Attention turned to Beard, who attempted to return the canister to the gas station for a deposit. Chevron employees recalled Beard's suspicious behavior and identified him to police. Shortly thereafter, Beard was arrested, and the evidence against him seemed clear. However, his mental health became a contentious issue. Despite multiple witnesses and forensic links, a court ruled Beard incompetent to stand trial. He was institutionalized rather than imprisoned, leaving many questions about his motivations unanswered. Today, the site of the Pomona Hotel has been rebuilt, offering affordable housing to those in need. Yet, for survivors and families of the victims, the scars remain. The fire's devastation serves as a haunting reminder of the consequences of negligence and unchecked danger. Portland, Oregon, January 4th, 1996. The city's bustling downtown came to a standstill as gunfire echoed through the iconic Coyne Center, a 35-story skyscraper that symbolized progress and modernity. What began as an ordinary day turned into a harrowing ordeal as a lone gunman stormed the building, taking hostages and injuring civilians. For hours, the city watched in fear as law enforcement worked to end the siege. But who was this man, and what drove him to such violence? The perpetrator, James Rinker, was a 24-year-old with a troubled past. Born and raised in Oregon, Rinker had a history of mental health issues and a deep-seated resentment toward authority. Those who knew him described a man struggling to find his place, often blaming others for his setbacks. In the months leading up to the attack, Rinker's erratic behavior escalated, marked by angry outbursts and an obsession with perceived injustices in his life. On the morning of January 4th, Rinker arrived at the Coyne Center armed with an AK-47 rifle, dressed in military-style camouflage and a black beret. He entered through the basement loading dock, bypassing initial security measures. Witnesses later reported that Rinker appeared calm yet determined as he moved toward his targets. The siege began when Rinker opened fire in the basement, wounding 2 men, Howard Barley, a delivery driver, and Alan Colkimo, a Beaverton resident. Despite being shot multiple times in the leg, Barley managed to crawl to safety, later recounting how Rinker's rifle had jammed, a malfunction that likely saved his life. As Rinker made his way to the building's lobby, he took his first hostage, a security guard. Firing sporadically, he activated the building's fire alarms, locking down the elevators and trapping occupants on various floors. His stated goal was to confront individuals he blamed for losing his courier job, but the chaos disrupted his plans. Unable to reach the upper levels, Rinker turned his attention to the Charles Schwab brokerage firm on the ground floor. Inside the office, Rinker took multiple hostages. For over 4 hours, he held them at gunpoint, issuing incoherent demands and railing against financial institutions, government corruption, and the media. Though armed and unpredictable, Rinker allowed hostages to contact their families, a gesture that seemed to reflect his internal conflict. He wasn't just a monster, one hostage later said. He was a deeply broken person. Negotiators worked tirelessly to de-escalate the situation. The turning point came when Keith Hedman, a security chief from Charles Schwab's San Francisco office, managed to get Rinker on the phone. Over the course of an hour, Hedman kept Rinker talking, providing a critical window for Portland police negotiators to establish rapport. The calm, measured communication began to wear down Rinker's resolve. Finally, at 3:45 p.m., Rinker surrendered. Emerging shirtless and handcuffed, he was escorted out by police, bringing the siege to an end. Miraculously, no one had been killed, though the emotional scars ran deep for those who had endured the ordeal. Rinker was charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, kidnapping, and weapons violations. During the trial, his defense team highlighted his history of untreated mental illness, arguing for leniency. However, the severity of his actions left little room for mercy. In 1997, Rinker was sentenced to 300 years in prison with no possibility of parole until 2266. He remains incarcerated, a reminder of the tragic consequences of untreated mental health issues and unchecked rage. Oregon's striking landscapes and vibrant communities contrast sharply with the haunting stories of these crimes. From a senseless triple homicide in Gresham to the chilling acts of Christian Longo and the devastation of the Pomona Hotel fire, these cases remind us of the shadows that can hide in even the most picturesque places. Darkness often lingers where we least expect it, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. Washington State is well known for its evergreen forests, rugged mountains, and fast-paced city life, but it also has a darker side, with a history marked by unsolved crimes and chilling mysteries. These often forgotten stories reveal the sinister undercurrents of human nature and the challenges of solving decades-old crimes. Today, we'll explore some of these gripping tales, ranging from tragic murders to unexplained disappearances. This is the true story of 10 unsolved cold cases from Washington State, and this is Northern Crimes. In the summer of 1971, 21-year-old Washington State University student Joyce LePage vanished, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the community. 9 months later, her skeletal remains were discovered, wrapped in a green carpet, deepening the enigma of her unsolved murder. Joyce Margaret LePage was a vibrant junior at WSU. She was known for her athleticism, intelligence, and friendly nature. Standing 5'9" with long light brown hair, she was well-liked on campus. Joyce held a private pilot's license and was taking skydiving lessons with ambitions that matched her adventurous spirit. On July 22, 1971, Joyce was last seen alive after her friends dropped her off at her apartment in Pullman, Washington. She had a skydiving lesson planned for the next day, but never showed up. Her car was found abandoned 10 days later with her shoes and purse inside. Then, in April 1972, a teenager discovered Joyce's skeletal remains wrapped in a green shag carpet in Wawaii Canyon, 10 miles from Pullman. The carpet was traced back to Stevens Hall, a WSU dormitory where Joyce frequently spent time. Authorities believe Joyce was murdered inside Stevens Hall, a dormitory under renovation that summer. She was known to sneak into the building to play the piano and write letters. Investigators think she was stabbed, wrapped in a military blanket in the dormitory carpet, then dumped in the remote ravine. Despite interviewing multiple suspects and re-examining evidence, the case remained unsolved. Serial killer Ted Bundy was briefly considered a suspect, but investigators now believe Joyce's killer was someone that she knew. The lack of forensic technology at the time hindered progress, and no arrests were made. Joyce's murder remains the oldest active unsolved case in Whitman County. Her family continues to seek justice, offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Despite the passage of nearly 5 decades, the mystery of what happened to Joyce endures, with no clear answers in sight. In 1979, Gijsberg Simon Ben Kistemaker, a 26-year-old Dutch traveler, embarked on an American road trip that turned tragic. His body was found months later in a remote Washington gravel pit, turning what began as an adventurous dream into a nightmare with no end. Ben Kistemaker was a Dutch adventurer eager to explore America. After arriving in the U.S. in May 1979, he bought a blue and white 1968 Chevy van and began a cross-country journey. Picking up hitchhikers along the way, his journey took him through Florida, Texas, California, and up the Pacific coast towards Vancouver, BC. In September 1979, Ben's van was found abandoned near mile marker 233 on Highway 101 in Oregon, out of gas and unlocked. Inside were his passport, identification, and a diary with a final entry written in a cramped style, suggesting distress. Despite these alarming clues, Ben was missing. On Christmas Day, 3 months later, hunters found his body in an old gravel pit near Rockport, Washington, over 8 hours from where his van had been found. Ben had been shot in the head, likely executed at close range, and his body was left in the pit. The investigation into Ben's murder was riddled with contradictions and dead ends. The distance between the van and his body suggested an abduction, but no evidence of a struggle was found. The fact that his personal items were left behind added to the mystery. Why would his killer leave such important clues? Despite collaboration between multiple law enforcement agencies, no suspects were definitively identified. The case grew cold, leaving many questions unanswered, including whether Ben was targeted or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Over 40 years later, Ben's murder remains unsolved. His family in the Netherlands still hopes for justice, but modern forensic technology has yet to yield new leads. The Skagit County Sheriff's Office considers the case open, but it remains a haunting mystery with no clear path to a resolution. In October 1988, 17-year-old Tracy West disappeared on her way to work in Shelton, Washington. Her motorcycle was found overturned on a trail, but Tracy was missing. 6 years later, her remains were discovered in a remote wooded area, leaving behind a mystery that still haunts Shelton. Tracy West was a high school senior living in Shelton, a close-knit logging town. Known for her outgoing personality and dedication to her job at a local restaurant, Tracy often rode her motorcycle to work, taking a well-traveled dirt road through the woods. She was a responsible, well-liked young woman with a promising future. On October 20, 1988, Tracy left home around 4 p.m. and headed to work. When she didn't arrive, her manager alerted her family, who reported her missing. Shortly after midnight, her motorcycle was found overturned on the trail with her helmet and glasses nearby. The scene appeared staged, but there was no sign of Tracy. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no trace of her was found until October 1994, when a hunter discovered a human skull in a remote wooded area 3 miles from where her motorcycle was found. The skull was confirmed to be Tracy's, and nearby, investigators found personal items, raising more questions than answers. Tracy's disappearance remained a cold case until her remains were found. The discovery of her skull and belongings in the remote woods suggested she was taken there after being abducted, but the identity of her abductor remains unknown. Theories have pointed to some local suspects, including the Johnson brothers and the Emery brothers, but no concrete evidence has linked them to the crime. The investigation struggled to gain momentum and no arrests were made. Detectives have periodically revisited the case, but no new leads have emerged. Tracy's murder continues to remain unsolved, and her family continues to seek justice. The community of Shelton still feels the weight of this unsolved crime, and local authorities continue to hope for new information that could finally bring closure. In March 1989, Bainbridge Island was rocked by a triple murder that left 3 young people dead. What seemed like a straightforward drug-related crime quickly became a tangled web of confessions, retractions, and unanswered questions, with only one of the killers ever brought to justice. The victims, J.D. Phillips, 23, Ty McCullough, 19, and Ann Rice, 19, were well-known residents of Bainbridge Island. On March 17, 1989, their lives were brutally cut short as they sat in McCullough's pickup truck on a secluded road. The trio was reportedly involved in the local drug scene, which presumably led to their violent deaths. On that fateful night, the 3 friends met in a remote area off Blakely Avenue. They were shot to death inside the truck, and their killers fled the scene, leaving behind a grisly crime. The motive appeared to be a drug-related dispute, possibly over a metal briefcase filled with cocaine. The bodies were discovered the next day, sparking a major investigation. The Kitsap County Sheriff's Office quickly identified 3 suspects, but bringing them to justice proved challenging. One suspect, Douglas Stanfield, confessed to his involvement, claiming that he and 2 others planned to steal the cocaine before things went wrong. However, Stanfield later recanted his confession, saying he made up the story while bored in jail. Despite his retraction, Stanfield struck a plea deal, pleading guilty to 2 of the murders in exchange for a lighter sentence. The other suspects were never convicted, leaving the case shrouded in mystery. The investigation was further complicated by unreliable witness testimonies and conflicting evidence, leading to ongoing speculation about the true events of that night. Today, the Bainbridge Island triple murders are officially considered solved, but many questions still remain. The 2 other suspects implicated by Stanfield were never brought to justice, leaving the victims' families with unresolved grief and the community with lingering doubts. The case is a reminder of how justice can sometimes be elusive, leaving scars that never fully heal. In 1993, the peaceful town of LaConner, Washington, was shattered by the brutal murder of 52-year-old Donna Arrowsmith. Her death in a quaint gift shop left the community reeling and law enforcement scrambling for answers. Donna Arrowsmith was a beloved member of the Mount Vernon community, known for her warm personality and dedication to her family. A mother of 4, Donna worked at Happy Valley Farms, a charming gift shop at LaConner's waterfront. She was twice divorced, but her life revolved around her children and her work. On July 26, 1993, Donna was closing the shop for the evening. Around 5:30 p.m., after chatting with a friend and the shop's owner, Donna Blades, loud noises were heard from the shop, including a woman shouting,
No, don't do that.
The noises were dismissed, and it wasn't until later that Donna's car was found still parked outside with the shop closed that something seemed wrong. Blades entered the shop using a master key, only to find Donna's body on the floor, brutally stabbed multiple times. This murder shocked the small town, which had never experienced anything like that. The investigation quickly involved multiple agencies, including the Washington State Patrol and the Skagit County Sheriff's Office. The crime scene was meticulously searched for clues, including a large section of vinyl flooring that might have held fingerprints or footprints. Divers scoured the nearby Swinomish channels for the murder weapon, but nothing was found. Despite these efforts, no solid leads emerged. Investigators struggled with the possibility that the murder was a robbery gone wrong, but the motive remained unclear. The lack of suspects and witnesses made this case difficult to solve, and it eventually went cold. Nearly 3 decades later, Donna's murder remains unsolved. Her children continue to live with the pain of not knowing who took their mother's life or why. The community of LaConner has changed, but the memory of Donna's tragic death lingers, a reminder of the violence that once shattered this town's peace. In January 1998, the quiet community of Big Lake, Washington, was rocked by the murder of 30-year-old Jeff Reynolds. Found dead from a gunshot wound in his home, Jeff's case has remained unsolved for over 2 decades, leaving his family and the community searching for answers. Jeff Reynolds was a typical Gen X member, trying to find his path in life. He lived with his girlfriend, Deanna Combs, in a home near Big Lake in Skagit County. Jeff was a man of many talents, working various jobs, including car repairs and dishwashing. He was also a passionate musician, playing bass in a band with his half-brother, Jamie Reynolds. On January 21, 1998, Deanna Combs returned home from work to find Jeff dead from a gunshot wound. The house showed no signs of forced entry, leading detectives to believe that Jeff likely knew his killer. The scene inside suggested a possible connection to the local drug trade, as drug paraphernalia, large amounts of cash, and scales were found scattered around. Despite these clues, the motive behind Jeff's murder remained unclear, and no suspects were definitively identified. The investigation into Jeff's murder was extensive, but ultimately frustrating for law enforcement. Detectives from the Skagit County Sheriff's Office followed hundreds of leads and even interviewed numerous persons of interest, but they never gathered enough evidence to make an arrest. The presence of drugs in Jeff's home suggested a possible motive linked to the local drug trade, but no concrete evidence supported this theory. Over the years, the case went cold, with detectives left piecing together a complicated web of potential suspects and motives. Jamie Reynolds, Jeff's half-brother, has refused to let the case be forgotten, using his band to keep Jeff's memory alive and push for answers. More than 2 decades later, Jeff Reynolds' murder remains unsolved. Despite efforts to bring renewed attention to the case, including a feature on Washington's Most Wanted, the mystery of who killed Jeff and why continues to haunt those who knew him. On December 2, 2000, 50-year-old Sharon Christine Anderson left her home in Stanwood, Washington, to run errands and do some Christmas shopping. She was supposed to return by 4:30 p.m., but she never did. Hours later, her locked vehicle was found at the Everett Mall, and Sharon was nowhere to be found. Sharon, known as Sherry, was a devoted mother, grandmother, and social worker living in Stanwood. She was married to John Anderson, a Boeing employee, and the couple shared a passion for Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Sherry was a reliable, hardworking woman who was loved by her family and friends. On the morning of December 2, 2000, Sherry left home around 9 a.m., planning to run errands and shop at the Everett Mall. She intended to return by 4:30 p.m. to attend a motorcycle show with her husband. When John woke up from a nap at 5:30 p.m., he realized Sherry hadn't returned. Her best friend, named Mary, found Sherry's silver Toyota 4Runner parked near the entrance of Mervyn's at the Everett Mall around 10 p.m. Inside the locked vehicle were Sherry's cell phone and gun, but there were no shopping bags. Since that day, there has been no activity on Sherry's credit card, bank accounts, or social security number, and no trace of her has ever been discovered. The disappearance of Sherry Anderson left investigators puzzled. Despite extensive searches around the mall and nearby areas, no clues were ever found. Friends and family, convinced that Sherry would never have walked away from her life, worked tirelessly to keep her case in the public eye. Flyers were spread across the Seattle area, and Sherry's story was featured on cold case playing cards distributed to inmates in Washington state prisons, but no substantial leads emerged. One theory suggests Sherry never made it inside the mall and that her car was planted there, but this has never been confirmed. Suspicion also fell on a client who had threatened Sherry, but it's unclear if this lead was ever fully pursued. Over 20 years later, Sherry's disappearance remains unsolved. She's been declared legally dead, but her family and friends continue to search for the truth. This case remains a haunting mystery, with no resolution in sight. On July 11, 2006, a serene hike in the Snoqualmie Mount Baker National Forest turned tragic when Mary Cooper and her daughter, Susanna Stodden, were found shot dead on the Pinnacle Lake Trail. This senseless act of violence remains unsolved. Mary Cooper, a beloved school librarian, and her daughter Susanna Stodden, an environmental studies graduate, shared a deep bond with nature. Both were known for their kindness and love for their family. Their passion for the outdoors made the Pinnacle Lake Trail a fitting choice for their hike on that fateful day. On the morning of July 11, 2006, Mary and Susanna set out for a day of hiking. Originally planning to hike Mount Pilchuck, they changed their itinerary due to concerns about snow and instead headed for Pinnacle Lake. Their bodies were discovered later that day on the trail, both shot in the head. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the community, and the partially removed clothing suggested a potential sexual assault, adding to the horror. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office launched an extensive investigation but found few leads. Mary's husband, David Stodden, was initially considered a suspect, but he was cleared after passing multiple polygraph tests. Frustrated by the lack of progress, David took matters into his own hands, creating a documentary about the murders and offering a monetary reward for anybody who had information. Despite these efforts, no suspects were identified, and the case grew cold. The isolated location and lack of witnesses hindered the investigation, leaving detectives baffled. "18 years later, this case continues to remain unsolved. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office continues to seek tips, but no new leads have emerged. The Pinnacle Lake murders are a haunting reminder of the violence that shattered 2 lives, and the mystery remains as deep as the forest where they were killed." In January 2007, the body of 37-year-old Karen Bodine was discovered on the side of Little Rock Road in Olympia, Washington. Strangled and left in a public location, her murder remains unsolved, leaving her family haunted by this heinous crime. Karen Bodine was a mother of 3, known for her fiery personality and deep love for her family. Her sudden and violent death left a void that has never been filled, affecting everyone who knew her. She was passionate, creative, and full of life, making her brutal murder all the more shocking. Karen spent the last hours of her life with a group of people in the early morning of January 22, 2007. Her body was discovered just hours later, dumped along Little Rock Road in a visible public location. The ligature used to strangle her was still around her neck, and the way her body was left suggests the killer wanted to shock the community and send a twisted message. The investigation identified several persons of interest, including individuals who'd been with Karen shortly before her death. However, despite extensive questioning and following hundreds of leads, no arrests were ever made. The DNA found on the ligature has been retested with new forensic technology, but the results have yet to point to a definitive suspect. Investigators have also considered the possibility that more than one person may have been involved, further complicating efforts to bring Karen's killer to justice. Karen's murder remains unsolved. Her daughters Carly and Taylor continue to seek justice, refusing to let their mother's case fade into obscurity. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office urges anyone with information to come forward, hoping that even the smallest detail could be the key to solving this tragic case. In February 2019, 20-year-old Matthew Anfeld disappeared from his hometown of Grand Mound. Nearly 5 years later, the discovery of his remains deepened the mystery surrounding his death, leaving his family hoping for any trace of resolution. Matthew Daniel Anfeld was born on January 27, 1999, in Washington State. Known for his close relationship with his family, especially his mother Sarah, Matthew was full of life and passionate about wrestling and music. Despite some struggles with substance abuse, he remained determined to build a better future. On February 28, 2019, Matthew spent the day with his sister, bowling and planning to watch movies at their family home. After leaving the room to retrieve his phone, Matthew never returned. Witnesses reported seeing him acting erratically, claiming people were after him and that his family had been killed. He was last seen at a Speedway grocery store where he appeared disheveled and scared. He fled before police could arrive, and that was the last time anyone saw him alive. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office launched an extensive search using drones, search dogs, and canvassing the area. Despite these efforts, no trace of Matthew was found. Investigators considered a mental health crisis, possibly exacerbated by drug use, and looked into an assault he suffered in December 2018 when he was attacked by 3 men who carved the word "kill" into his chest. Despite numerous tips and leads, the investigation stalled. Then, the discovery of Matthew's remains in a remote area nearly 5 years later raised new questions, particularly how he ended up so far from where he was last seen. On October 28, 2023, Matthew's remains were discovered by a hunter in a remote area of Thurston County. Investigators haven't been clear exactly where this was, only describing it as the, quote, Greater Rochester Grand Mound area. The investigation into how he died remains ongoing, with detectives seeking to determine if foul play was involved. The discovery has brought some closure to his family, but many questions remain unanswered. Washington State's unsolved cold cases linger as a reminder of lives cut short and mysteries unsolved. Each case is a story of human tragedy, a balance between darkness and light. The beauty of this region hides a darker reality, families waiting for closure, and communities hoping for the day that some of these mysteries are finally solved. Will the answers ever emerge, or will these cases remain forever shrouded in the mists of time? Only time will tell, but the search for truth continues. In the summer of 1982, a man fishing near Seattle's Green River made a grim discovery. The body of a young woman floating just beneath the surface, her arm caught in the current, swaying gently like it was reaching for help. It was the first of many, and it marked the beginning of a case that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for decades. Gary Leon Ridgway, born February 18, 1949, would ultimately confess to killing 49 women, but claimed the number was over 70. For nearly 20 years, this unassuming truck painter prowled the region, targeting vulnerable women and leaving their bodies in wooded quarters outside Seattle. What made Ridgway so terrifying wasn't just the scale of his crimes, it was how utterly average he seemed. At 5 foot 10 inches tall, with a forgettable face and a stable job at Kenworth painting trucks, Ridgway appeared harmless. He was a regular churchgoer. To neighbors, he was quiet, polite, and unremarkable. But his crimes revealed a calculated cruelty. Ridgway cruised Seattle's Pacific Highway South, an area known as the Strip, where he picked up sex workers and runaways. He often used photos of his son to earn their trust before taking them to secluded areas and strangling them, sometimes during or after sex. He would later return to the scenes of his crimes to violate their corpses, not out of obsession, he claimed, but to reduce his urge to kill again. It was a grotesque logic, showing a predator who saw his victims not as people, but as tools to manage his compulsions. Despite being interviewed by police in 1982 and passing a polygraph in 1984, Ridgway remained free. The Green River Task Force spent years chasing leads, even consulting with Ted Bundy in prison for insight. The breakthrough came in 2001, when new DNA technology linked Ridgway's decades-old saliva sample to semen recovered from several victims. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ridgway agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he would help locate the remains of his victims. His confession was chilling. He couldn't remember names, only dump sites. "I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." Today, Ridgway is serving 49 life sentences at Washington State Penitentiary. His case remains one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history, not only because of the lives lost, but because of how long he was able to hide in plain sight. A man invisible in the crowd who turned ordinary spaces into hunting grounds. She woke to pain and confusion. Karen Sparks, just 18 years old, had fallen asleep in her basement apartment near the University of Washington. She didn't know that a man had crept inside, that he'd crushed her skull while she slept, that she would survive, but barely. Her attacker vanished into the night. That was January 1974. The man responsible? Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy appeared to be everything a predator shouldn't be. Educated, clean-cut, charming, a law student with political connections. But beneath the polished exterior was a man who would become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, confessing to 30 murders across 7 states, though the true number is likely far higher. Bundy operated with terrifying precision. He approached young women in broad daylight, often feigning injury, an arm in a sling, crutches, dropped books, playing on empathy. Once they offered help, he then lured them to his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle, and then he attacked. Most of his victims resembled one another, slender, white, long dark hair parted in the middle, and it was no coincidence. They looked like his ex-girlfriend. Throughout 1974, women began vanishing from Washington and Oregon colleges. Linda Ann Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks. In July, 2 women disappeared from a crowded lake on the same day. Witnesses remembered a man named Ted driving a VW Bug. Bundy fled the Northwest and continued killing in Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. Eventually arrested in 1975, he escaped custody not once, but twice. After his escape, in 1977, he made his way to Florida, where his crimes reached their most brutal climax. At Florida State University, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house and attacked 4 women as they slept, killing 2. Weeks later, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Her body was found in a pig shed. Bundy's trial became a media spectacle. He defended himself in court, smiling for cameras, manipulating the press. Even as evidence mounted, some saw him as too intelligent, too clean-cut to be a killer. It was one of the first true crime stories to captivate the nation in real time. On January 24, 1989, Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside, a crowd cheered. His legacy is uniquely disturbing. Bundy wasn't the monster in the shadows. He was the man in line behind you, the one who smiles, shakes your hand, and never raises suspicion. He changed how we talk about serial killers. He forced law enforcement to modernize, pushing for centralized databases, interjurisdictional communication, and criminal profiling. But more than that, Bundy shattered illusions. Evil, it turns out, doesn't always look the way we expect. The snow-covered wilderness of Alaska stretches for miles. Beautiful, vast, and deadly. It's the kind of place where a person can literally vanish without a trace. And for more than a decade, that's exactly what happened. But the disappearances weren't caused by nature. They were caused by a man with a pilot's license, a hunting rifle, and a twisted plan. His name was Robert Hansen. To most, Hansen was a quiet Anchorage baker, a family man who set hunting records and ran a successful shop. But beneath the modest exterior lived a predator who used Alaska's isolation to his advantage. Between 1971 and 1983, he abducted women, many of them sex workers, and flew them into the wilderness where he let them run. Then, he hunted them down like animals. Born in 1939 in Esterville, Iowa, Hansen was a shy child with a stutter, severe acne, and a deep resentment towards women. He found comfort in solitude and sharpened his skills with firearms and archery, interests that would later become tools of his crimes. His attacks escalated over time. He began by stealing, setting fires, and then assaulting women. After moving to Alaska in the 1960s, he eventually developed a method: lure a woman under false pretenses, restrain her, fly her deep into the bush, and give her a short head start before beginning the hunt. It was only by chance that the truth came to light. In 1983, a 17-year-old named Cindy Paulson escaped from Hansen's plane. Handcuffed and terrified, she ran barefoot across a parking lot and flagged down help. Her story was the break police needed. When they searched Hansen's home, they found trophies, jewelry from victims, a stash of weapons, and a detailed map marked with dozens of shallow grave sites. Hansen eventually confessed to murdering 17 women and assaulting dozens more. Only 12 sets of remains were ever recovered. His victims included Sherry Morrow, Paula Golding, and Eklutna Annie, a name given to one unidentified woman buried near a power line. In fact, we covered her case in a previous video, Unsolved Mysteries from Alaska. In 1984, Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He died behind bars in 2014 at the age of 75. His case exposed a grim truth. When victims are poor, addicted, or involved in sex work, they're often not believed. Hansen preyed on that invisibility. He knew these women wouldn't be missed quickly, and he was right. In a place as wild as Alaska, Hansen found the perfect cover for his crimes, but it wasn't the landscape that failed these women. It was the system. The surveillance footage is grainy, but the fear is unmistakable. 18-year-old Samantha Koenig stands behind the counter of a small Anchorage coffee kiosk, making a drink for her last customer of the night. She smiles politely. Then he pulls a gun. That man was Israel Keyes. Born in 1978 in Utah and raised in an isolated, extremist household in rural Washington, Keyes grew up off the grid, without electricity, surrounded by racist ideologies, and alienated from mainstream society. But his darkness wasn't rooted in belief. It was in control. Unlike most serial killers, Keyes didn't stalk specific victims. He stalked locations. He buried kill kits across the United States, buckets filled with guns, cash, restraints, and disposal tools, sometimes years in advance. Then he'd fly or drive thousands of miles, retrieve a kit, kill someone at random, and vanish. No connection, no pattern, no motive, except the thrill of getting away with it. Koenig's abduction in February 2012 would be his undoing. After assaulting and murdering her, Keyes kept her body frozen in a shed while he went on a cruise with his family. When he returned, he staged a photo of her body with a recent newspaper to create a fraudulent ransom demand. The photo was sent to her family. They thought she was still alive. What ultimately brought Keyes down was a mistake. He used Koenig's debit card to withdraw money across multiple states. In Texas, a highway patrol officer stopped him for a minor traffic violation and found a mask, a gun, and the ATM card in his rental car. In custody, Keyes stunned investigators. He was calm, articulate, and terrifyingly matter-of-fact. He confessed to the murders of Samantha Koenig and Bill and Lorraine Currier in Vermont, but hinted at many more. FBI agents believe he may have killed as many as 11 people, maybe more. He never gave names. "I've got a lot more stories to tell," he said in interviews, but those stories died with him. On December 2nd, 2012, Keyes ended his life in an Anchorage jail cell. He left behind a cryptic, blood-soaked suicide note and an unanswered trail of bodies. What makes Israel Keyes uniquely terrifying isn't just the violence, it's the strategy. He was a killer without a type, a motive, or a trace. He hid in the open, a small business owner with a daughter, respected in the community. And yet behind the mask, he was one of the most calculating predators the FBI has ever encountered. He didn't want fame, he wanted control, and that's what makes him so hard to forget. Two people sat in prison for a murder they didn't commit. Laverne Pavlinac and her boyfriend, John Sosnowski. They'd confessed to the 1990 killing of Tanya Bennett in Oregon. The media called it a closed case. But the real killer was growing impatient. Keith Jesperson wanted credit, and he would go to disturbing lengths to make sure the world knew it. Standing 6 feet 8 inches tall, Jesperson was an imposing figure, a long-haul trucker whose routes crisscrossed the country. Born in 1955 in British Columbia and raised in Washington State, Jesperson had a violent childhood. By age 5, he was harming animals, and as an adult, he turned that cruelty toward people. After murdering Tanya Bennett in 1990, Jesperson became furious when others were arrested for the crime, so he began writing anonymous confessions, first to police, then to the press. Each was signed with a distinctive smiley face, earning him the nickname that would stick, the Happy Face Killer. The letters were chilling. In one, scrawled on a truck stop bathroom, he wrote, "I beat her to death, raped her, and loved it. 2 people took the blame, and I'm free." Between 1990 and 1995, Jesperson killed at least 8 women, most of them sex workers or hitchhikers he met on the road. The true number is unknown. He once claimed to have killed over 160, though investigators believe that's an exaggeration. His crimes stretched all the way across the country, from California to Florida, and Nebraska to Washington. Many of his victims remain unidentified. His final murder was one of the few personal ones, Julie Winningham, a girlfriend who had grown suspicious of him. That connection proved to be his mistake. Jesperson was arrested in 1995 after leaving a note at a rest stop confessing to Julie's murder. In custody, he began cooperating, eager to talk, to brag, to control the narrative. What sets Jesperson apart isn't just his violence, but his obsession with acknowledgement. He didn't want to be anonymous. He wanted the spotlight. Even after his arrest, he manipulated interviews and toyed with law enforcement. For him, the killings were only half the story. The rest was about being seen. He now serves multiple life sentences at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Years later, his daughter Melissa Moore would come forward with her own story, revealing what it was like to grow up with a father who killed in secret and smiled in public. Jesperson's case isn't just about murder. It's about the fallibility of the justice system, the damage of wrongful convictions, and the haunting reality that evil doesn't always hide. Sometimes it wants to be found. The forest floor was quiet, except for the breeze rustling through the ferns. Then came the sound of boots. Investigators moving through a patch of Oregon woods near Molalla. Scattered across the undergrowth, they found the remains of 6 women. The killer had left them in the trees like discarded trash. His name was Dayton Leroy Rogers. Born in 1953 in Moscow, Idaho, Rogers lived a life of duality. A small engine repairman with a wife and child, friendly, dependable. But at night, he cruised the highways around Portland, looking for women he believed the world wouldn't miss. Women battling addiction, women in sex work, women who'd fallen through society's cracks. He would later be known as Oregon's most prolific serial killer. Rogers' crimes came to light on August 7, 1987, when patrons at a Denny's restaurant in Oak Grove witnessed a horrifying scene in the parking lot. A young woman, 25-year-old Jennifer Lisa Smith, stumbled from Rogers' pickup covered in blood with 11 stab wounds to her chest and back. She died at the hospital. Rogers fled the scene but was quickly identified and arrested. The murder led investigators to a patch of woodland near Molalla. There, they uncovered the graves of 6 more women, bound, mutilated, left among the brush. The victims included Lisa Marie Mock, Maureen Hodges, and 16-year-old Reatha Giles. All had been tortured before being killed. Rogers' signature, a cocktail of vodka and orange juice in mini liquor bottles, was found at several of the dump sites, linking him to the crimes. Forensic evidence and witness accounts painted a disturbing picture. Rogers lured his victims with offers of money or transportation and then drove them into the woods to die. He was convicted in 1989 and sentenced to death for the Molalla Forest murders, but the story didn't end there. In a strange legal twist, the Oregon Supreme Court overturned his death sentence not once, but 3 times over procedural issues. Each time, a new jury sentenced him to death again. Then, in December 2022, Governor Kate Brown commuted all death sentences in the state to life without parole. effectively ending any chance of execution for Rogers. He now resides at Two Rivers Correctional Institution in Umatilla. Dayton Rogers didn't target victims for who they were, but for who society believed they weren't. He exploited a system that ignored the vulnerable and believed no one would go looking. He was wrong, but it took far too long to prove it. He'd already killed once, brutally, and he got away with it. In 2000, Della Brown was found beaten to death in a rundown shed in Anchorage, Alaska. Witnesses saw Joshua Wade at the scene. He bragged about the murder to friends, but when the case went to trial, Wade was acquitted of murder and convicted only of evidence tampering. He walked free, and then, 7 years later, he killed again. Mindy Schloss was a 52-year-old nurse practitioner, well-liked and devoted to her work in Fairbanks. On August 3, 2007, she vanished. She never made it to her shift that day. At first, it was a missing person case, and then her car was found abandoned, and then a shoe print on the seat back suggested someone had been forced down inside. Wade, who lived next door to Schloss in Anchorage, had broken into her home. He zip-tied her hands, stole her ATM card, and forced her to give up the PIN. Surveillance footage later showed him withdrawing money in a bandana and hoodie, trying to hide his face. He drove her into the woods near Wasilla and shot her in the back of the head. When police finally caught up with Wade, he held hostages during a tense standoff before surrendering. In custody, he was smug, defiant. At one court hearing, he shouted across the courtroom, "What about the men I killed?" It wasn't just bravado. In 2010, Wade took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, 99 years for Schloss's murder, plus a federal life sentence. Then, in 2014, he confessed to 3 more killings, including one he committed at just 14 years old. The total count, at least 5 known victims. On June 14, 2024, Joshua Wade was found dead in his cell at Indiana State Prison. The cause of death is still under investigation. His story is a case study in missed red flags. He showed signs of violence early. He expressed hatred towards women, especially Alaskan Native women. And still, he was given a second chance, and he used it to kill again. Wade's case isn't just about what he did, it's about what should have stopped him and didn't. He was sentenced to death in 1949. He should have died in prison in Alaska before most of his victims were even born, but Harvey Kerrigan didn't hang. A legal technicality overturned his conviction, and for the next 3 decades, he would roam free, leaving a trail of broken bodies and lives across the American Northwest. Born in 1927 in Fargo, North Dakota, Kerrigan's early life was marked by instability. Raised by relatives diagnosed with behavioral disorders and known for bedwetting and violence, his path followed a dark and familiar pattern. By age 22, he had joined the Army, and by 22, he had also murdered. In Anchorage, Alaska, he attempted to rape 58-year-old Laura Showalter. When she fought back, he beat her to death with his bare hands. He was convicted and sentenced to death, but his confession had been coerced, the court said. He was released, and the killing resumed. By the 1970s, Kerrigan was living in Minnesota and Washington, where he ran a gas station. He placed help-wanted ads targeting young women, lured them with job offers, and then beat, raped, and murdered them. His weapon of choice? A hammer. In 1973, 15-year-old Kathy Sue Miller responded to one of those ads. She never returned home. Her body was found wrapped in plastic on a reservation north of Everett. Her skull had been shattered by repeated hammer blows. Kerrigan didn't stop. He assaulted Gwen Burton, who miraculously survived despite being assaulted with a hammer and left for dead in a field. He kidnapped 2 teenage girls, Sally Versoy and Diane Flynn, who escaped only because he stopped for gas. 18-year-old Catherine Schultz wasn't so lucky. She was found beaten to death in a Minnesota cornfield. He was arrested in 1974. At trial, he pleaded insanity, claiming God had ordered him to, quote, kill whores and harlots. The court didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 60 years, and then another 40, and then life. Even from prison, he remained a figure of morbid fascination, one of those rare serial killers to have spanned decades and dodged multiple convictions. Harvey Carignan died in 2023 at the age of 95 in Minnesota's Oak Park Heights prison. His case is a grim reminder that some monsters are stopped too late, that paperwork errors and procedural missteps can have deadly consequences, and that one overlooked confession can unleash decades of horror. The Pacific Northwest is known for its stillness, towering evergreens, remote coastlines, and winding roads that disappear into the mist. But in that silence, something else was lurking. These 10 killers remind us of how easily darkness can hide behind a friendly smile or a quiet demeanor. How quickly the system can fail to protect the vulnerable, and how long it can take before someone finally notices what's missing. Some were caught, some confessed, some took their secrets to the grave. But the damage they left behind still echoes through empty homes, cold files, and families forever changed. Because out here, in the quiet corners of the Pacific Northwest, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming.